Chapter 14 Romance and Trouble Amongst the Headstones. October 23, 2007, 3:39 p.m. In all, there were 7 gravestones which had been resurrected. Sue had done her best to write them exactly where they had fallen, since this most likely marked the location of the actual graves. From what she could tell, 2 separate families had been interred in this small clearing near the stone wall. The original owner of the house, Helmut Bauer, had succumbed in 1777 after serving 25 years as a well-established shoemaker. His beloved daughter Hester had perished in November of the year 1789 and was remembered by an unassuming headstone made of slate. Her cause of death was unspecified. Reverend Benjamin Potter, the artisan responsible for the inscribed boulder in the cellar, his wife Ruth, and their twins Phoebe and Thomas, each had their own ornate marble stones which were set off a few yards from the Bowers. Apparently Phoebe and Thomas had never known life outside of the womb, as described by their sullen epitaph, died in childbirth September 13, 1794. The Reverend's end had come at the hands of the smallpox virus on October 28, 1799. Ruth had held on the longest, making it to April 7, 1831, when old age had finally taken her. There was one other stone, a small granite block, simply etched with the name Sir Scruffy. Presumably, he was a Potter family pet, as indicated by his sweet words of remembrance, June 93, chasing raindrops in heaven. Sue was most affected by Ruth's life story. Here was a woman who had tragically lost both of her children during labor and outlived her husband by 32 years. Ruth's marble stone was adorned with a biblical message that most likely represented the philosophical crutch she had used to carry her through her hardships. And we know that all things work together for good to them that love God, to them who are called according to his purpose. Romans 8:28.
She must have been old Yankee stock,
Sue sighed, thinking of the loneliness and sadness this widower must have had to endure. Being of the same heritage herself, she dutifully vowed to uphold the tradition as caretaker of 2 Old Stable Lane.
If you could do it, Ruth Potter, so can I.
Without explanation, her senses became sharply acute. There was something faint that seemed to be whispering into her ear. At first, the subdued sounds of the woods had been intertwined into a single indiscernible tone made up of chirps, breezes, rustling leaves, and the quiet of the isolation, all running together to sing a sweet lullaby of subtle music. But then, for whatever reason, Sue's hearing had latched onto a particular note in the wood's soft song. It sounded like water, running water. She arose from her kneeling position on the ground to concentrate on the dissonance. It was coming from far away, from the other side of the stone wall. Sue treaded lightly to the run-down wooden gate, trying very intently to recapture the sound. There it was, a trickling murmur. She peeked at the hanging no trespassing sign on the top slat of the gate, then at the grooved trail that spilled over a distant hill.
Oh, I'm sure it's no biggie if I just go check it out.
The right-hand hinges on the gate had pulled away from the post, leaving a V-shaped opening. As Sue tried to slip through the gap, a rusted nail played the spoiler by tearing a good-sized gash in her comfy work jeans. A spot of red on the fabric and a dull smarting in her thigh let her know that the sharp tip had broken the skin.
Nice going, Susan. What a klutz.
She rubbed at her leg as she proceeded along the path into new territory. Her steps led to where the land dropped sharply away, which to this point had been a mystery from her side of the wall. From the top of the rise she looked down upon a most surprising sight. 2 black and white cows were standing knee-deep in the middle of a peaceful stream. The moving water's volume was markedly louder now that she had closed the distance. She made her way over to a flat rock and quietly lowered herself to observe the animals sipping from the passing flow. Her presence seemed to go unnoticed, or at least was of no concern, because they never lifted their heads in her direction. She was taken by both their massive size and the amount of water they could consume. "You realize you're trespassing," a deep-chested voice said from behind her. The pastoral scenery had caused her to drop her guard completely. As she turned to look at the accuser, her initial estimate of where the man's face would be fell far shy of the mark. She tilted her head up to the giant who stood before her, only to experience a blazing rush flooding through her system. The most attractive man she had ever laid eyes on was looking down at her. In attempting to stand from the rock, she nearly swooned backwards from a bout of lightheadedness.
I'm sorry. I just heard the water and the trail of my property.
Their eyes locked, plunging Sue into a sea of incredible crystal blue. The skin on his face maintained a shade of a summer tan, and all of his beautiful masculinity was framed by a thick shock of curly brown hair, smattered with silver at the sides. She tried to fill her lungs with air, but found this to be nearly impossible. "Looks like I caught you with your hand in the cookie jar," he said. Knowing full well that her speaking voice was still smoothing itself, she raised her arms in silent surrender. "You must be the new owner of the Pratt's old place."
I'm, guilty as charged.
She replied, blushing even more. She chided herself for nearly tripping on her tongue when she had first turned around and seen him. "Welcome to the neighborhood. The name's Jake Peters."
Pleasure to meet you. I'm Susan Blake.
As they made their acquaintance, his huge hand engulfed hers with an astonishingly gentle touch. Sue's heart was wildly palpitating under emotions she had not felt since her teenage years.
Please pinch me,
She thought.
This has to be a dream.
Jake looked down upon Sue's upturned face with approval. Her large, doe-like eyes had the longest lashes and prettiest hazel color he had ever seen. It was amusing how totally flustered and vulnerable she was standing there in front of him. He could not get over how lovely this woman was in a powerful, earthy way. His handsome smile faltered when he caught a glimpse of her tattered hip. "Oh, you hurt yourself."
Hurt? What do you mean?
Sue followed his stare to something that made her crave a second chance at the all-important first impression. The red spot on her jeans had grown considerably in size. Quickly throwing a hand over the stain, she answered,
It's just a scratch from that gate up there.
"Looks like you stuck yourself pretty good. Have you had a tetanus shot recently?"
I think so. Watch, tomorrow I'll wake up with lockjaw. Actually, I'm having a little trouble right now. How long does it take for the symptoms to set in?
"Don't say that," Jake said with a laugh.
No, I'll be fine. My favorite jeans, on the other hand, didn't fare too well.
Their small talk was interrupted when an orange and white blur flew out of the underbrush and stopped at the edge of the stream. She recognized the stocky cat immediately.
Hi, Tom.
"Tom?" Jake asked inquisitively.
I gave him the name a couple days back when he came by for a visit. Is he yours?
"For 7 years now."
He's a real beauty.
"Thanks."
Not to mention, a pretty good hunter, too. I saw him chase down a mouse in my backyard. Looked just like a tiger.
"Oh, I'm sure," Jake said, beaming. "He's hands down the best farm cat I've ever had,
Quite the high praise.
and deserving of it.
If not Tom, then what's his real name?
This is the one and only Nugget." She squatted to ground level and scratched the solid animal under the chin, much to his purring delight.
Where'd you get that from?
"Nugget? It has to do with the way I found him. Or saved him, I should say." She glanced to her neighbor with interest. "See, I was out tilling the field one day when I happened to look over at the stream. Thank goodness I did when I did." He motioned to his cat. "This guy over here was just a teeny kitten. How he ever got into the predicament he was in, or where he even came from for that matter, I'll never know. But there he was, teetering across an old log that had fallen from bank to bank. I'm sitting there saying, what's that crazy thing trying to do? All of a sudden he lost his footing and plopped right into the water. Needless to say, I went flying over to see if he needed my assistance, and he did. By the time I got there, he was nearly drowned, from the current dragging him under. But fear not, Jake to the rescue. I jumped in and plucked him right off the bottom. It was like panning for gold and coming up with a winner. He's gone by Nugget ever since."
Aha!
"Yeah, ever since I've known him, he's been nothing short of a daredevil, although he tends to shy away from the water sports. I'm sure you can understand." They both chuckled as Jake stroked his pal's wiggling tail. She had a thought and looked over her shoulder.
Hey Jake, I was wondering something.
"What's that?"
Do you know anything about that cemetery up there?
"Up where?"
Right against the stone wall, on my side.
"Can't say that I do. Doesn't surprise me, though. They're pretty common out this way."
Well, I've got one.
"You and me both. Mine's in the woods behind my barn. We're talking actual Minutemen."
That's how old my families are.
"You all right with it?"
Oh, sure. In fact, just before you caught me, I was up building a wall around the headstones.
"I'm sure the spirits appreciate that kindly."
I hope so. It really does look nice.
"I'll have to come evaluate your handiwork sometime."
I'd be happy to show it to you now, if you'd like.
"As much as I'd love to, I have to pass. See, these troublemakers need to be returned to their field." Pointing to the waiting cows, he said, "Daisy and Tinker are notorious wanderers. Don't be surprised to see them trekking across your backyard or steaming up your window someday. They've popped up in some pretty interesting places. This tends to be one of their more popular hideaways, so it's usually my first place to look."
I can't believe how huge they are when you get this close.
Jake laughed as he realized her newness to country life. "Actually, Daisy's bigger than normal. She's due to calf in a few weeks."
How cool.
"I'm not so sure she shares those sentiments. She tends to get rather grumpy right about this point in the pregnancy.
Women often do, Jake.
She kidded. And rightfully so. Grumpy is okay by me.
I bet newborns are the cutest.
They are. I always like watching the calf stand for the first time with all the wobbling and determination that goes into it.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
Daisy gained their attention with a splash and climb out of the water. Well, Sue, I hate to break this off, but I've got to take care of my farmer obligations.
By all means.
He shook her hand again, obliterating the threads of her re-established poise. It sure was nice meeting you, even if you are a lawbreaker. His eyes creased and a deep dimple split his cheek.
I've learned my lesson. I'll never trespass again. I promise.
I'm only kidding with you. You're welcome anytime. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon and make sure you take care of that leg. He spun on his heel and effortlessly jumped the stream. She watched the swaying cows follow his rugged build across the field and around a group of trees to the left.
Wait until Dodo hears about this one.
She walked back up the trail into the woods, replaying the conversation over and over in her mind. How fortuitous it had been for her to wander beyond her property line at the exact moment that she had. Perhaps it was the doings of fate, the same which had drawn Jake's eye to a certain kitten 7 years earlier, or sheer luck that had pushed her to this meeting. But whatever it was, Sue knew that she was right for breaking the law just this once. In order to prevent a second confrontation with the gate's unfriendly nail, she veered from the trail and hopped the wall. Her focus returned to the commemorative foot-high square of rocks that was enclosing the aged gravestones. All she had left to accomplish was to remove the leaves, needles, mushrooms, and sticks that were lying within the wall's confines. Selecting her weapon of choice from the wheelbarrow, she stepped into the cemetery to do the required task. Each stroke of the rake cleared a clean, dark path of dirt. Before she knew it, the ground cover was no longer company to the stone markers. Eventually, when the calendar rolled forward to the months of spring, Sue would plant colorful shade perennials at the base of each. The neatly raked dirt would have to suffice for now. With a playful leap, she flopped into a pile of leaves that had accumulated along the outside of the wall. Suddenly, with no obvious explanation, the glee that was hedging her became permeable, allowing something vicious to attack that she had not felt since she had been a little girl. It happened the moment she directed a stare down the wooded chute to the back of the house, to the windows, to the dark, black panes of the windows. The teeth in her mouth began to click with the cold fuel. For some inexplicable reason, she was suddenly afraid, just like when she had been 4 years old and bedtime would roll around, when the dark would be coming to get her. The feeling was extreme and unsettling, as if she were transmitted through a time warp into that childhood mentality. A grip of foreboding enveloped her, sending chills up her spine, neck, and cheeks. She looked about her surroundings from side to side, then upward into the tops of the trees, finding nothing out of the ordinary. Her hands crossed to her upper arms in an effort to make the chill subside, but it was already ahead of her, pulling at the flesh of her thighs and lower back. She pushed herself up from the leaves and burned an intense stare at the windows. It was impossible to see into the house from this distance. It was impossible to see into the house from any distance. The panes were dark, too dark, and empty. Completely and totally empty, yet filled with blackened emptiness, filled with it. A distracting shiver triggered through her body and turned her eyes to the tops of the trees. The leaves above were no longer sharp or highlighted with the golden light of the sun.
That's gotta be it,
she thought, shaking her head. Her strong sense of uneasiness had to be coming from the combination of working factors that were all around her. The cemetery, the solitude, the setting sun, and the damp leaf bed. She tried to shake the chills away by spreading the leaves across the forest floor. Despite the nagging urge to check the house's darkened windows, Sue pushed onward and soon was taking in the results of her final landscaping work. She had done satisfyingly well. 3 days of intensity, and the yard was ready to accept the blanket of fall. Only one more raking would have to take place, but this would not occur until the surrounding woods stood naked and exposed to the winter. Now Sue's efforts could be focused on her wonderful new house. There was not much time to bring the second and third floors together before Ryan would be coming home for Christmas. It would be a difficult feat to accomplish, but she would certainly be doing everything she could to pull it off. A reddish light from the sun reflected on the left-hand windows of the house as she emerged from the backwoods. She swept a gaze across the split-toned sky, going from the red of the west to the deepening purple of the east, and viewed several twinkling stars amid the darkest spectrum. It had been a long, grueling day. Aside from this strange episode of unfounded anxiety in the leaves, many positives had developed along the way. Her thoughts became infused with Jake, and the cemetery until she stooped to place the rake, trowel, and gloves near the bulkhead. In so doing, a dull pain bladed in her lower stomach, reminding her that the last time she had visited the bathroom was early in the morning.
I'd better take care of this before I go,
She thought, and dug her keys out of her pocket. Upon reaching the second floor, she hit the round button on the kitchen wall, causing the new light above the table to come on with brilliance.
Doesn't that look gorgeous?
Out of curiosity, she turned the dimmer switch from high to low. The light went dark, as did her rational thought process. A tiny squirt of adrenaline released, and though it was nearly immeasurable, it felt as though a 10-gallon drum had been poured directly into her veins. With her heart increasing in speed, she wrenched the knob back to high.
My God, what the heck is wrong with me?
She asked out loud, looking down at her trembling fingers.
Get a grip, girl.
She passed through the hallway and went into the bathroom to take care of her pressing needs. While sitting there, she noticed that Roger had left some of his tools and personal belongings on the countertop. His hammer, a nail punch, a box of finished nails, a level, gloves, a half-drunk bottle of vanilla cola, and his pack of cigarettes. They were a filterless, no-messing-around, inhale-it-and-you-know-it brand of smokes. They were wides, the kind she and Doreen referred to as truck drivers. At first, she had full self-control. There was no temptation for her anymore. It had been weeks since she had put one of those cancer sticks to her mouth. By every ounce of her power, it would never happen again. She was done with it, period. Besides, the pack was Roger's, not hers. Then again, her nerves were slightly on edge. She could still feel the shakiness in her fingers, and her heart had not stopped its thunking in her chest. Way deep inside, she was convinced that if she ever did smoke another cigarette, it would be under her total control. When she said stop, she would stop, period. The pack was Roger's, but that didn't much matter. She could always use the kick a free cigarette to a fellow addict in need of a fix sharing policy that all smokers rely on now and again. She finished up her business and went to the sink to wash. Looking at herself in the mirror, she mulled between her two choices. One was to keep the streak alive, simply going out to the car and driving home. The other was to snub the streak by lighting up for a few hits, then going out to the car and driving home. Something on the inside was pleading for her not to do it, commanding her not to do it, but at the same time the craving was there to do it, in the very worst way. Her nerves needed calming. Yes, they needed calming.
One little cigarette never hurt anybody.
With an audible, the pressure subsided. She tapped a butt from the pack, brought it to her lips, lit it, and sucked a sweet piece into her lungs. It burned somewhat, for it had been quite some time since the last drag, but it was like heaven. Pure, unadulterated heaven.
God, I needed that,
She said to her reflection and made her way back to the kitchen with the pea stick in hand. Yes, her nerves were back in line. She could hold her fingers rigid as arrows, not a tremble to them. Her wisdom had led her to the appropriate choice. The next day she would begin a new streak of non-smoking. She was in control. When she said stop, she would stop. Period. Making sure to snap off the light so that all was dark, she calmly went out to the car and drove home for the night.